This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The champion, welcome, Danny Batten.
Yes, guys, I'm Si. Welcome to A.C.E Podcast Nation, A.C.E Podcast Nation, home of the Danny Batten Fight Show, powered by Violent Money. Do check out Violent Money, the TV on YouTube, as well as their social media, and of course, Violent Money Academy, which is the first smart gym in the UK. But away we go. I'm losing my voice, so I apologise in advance. Well done, Wales, by the way. Get in. But as always, we're live. We've got a couple of special guests this evening. We'll be talking lots of bits and pieces. But let's get into it with no further ado. As always, I'm joined by former Cage Warriors world champion, UK MMA legend. It is Mr. Danny Batten. How are you, mate? You good?
Yeah, right. Sorry, listeners. Yeah, I think, what is it? I've heard 10 straight weeks of UFC to entertain us. All good stuff.
There's no stopping it now, is there? Last week was the last week of... Last week was the kind of the break on it before there's just non-stop fights every single weekend. So it's going to be an interesting period. But I'm delighted to welcome back to the show and the channel. He is a two-weight Cage Warriors champion back in the day. But of course, he is now UFC lightweight. This Mason, the Dragon Jones. And what an apt name for today, the Dragon. It is my fellow Welshman, Mason Jones. How are you, mate? You good?
Good. Obviously, best country in the world.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's good to hear the boys did well. Yeah,
it was emotional, mate.
Team, so good.
It was emotional, mate. I don't know. Like, I haven't been that emotional watching a football match for a very long time, and it kind of broke me at the end. But there we go. So if my voice goes, we know why. It's been a while, mate, since we had a good old chat with you. You've been a busy boy.
I've had a lot on my plate, to be fair. I had problems going into my last fight with injuries that were literally like stopping me from really training. So I went into the last fight. I went in with like some bad injuries. I ended up getting the flu. Still got the win, so that's all that really matters. And then I ended up having a break for physio, which ended up ended up having surgery. And then I've just been rebuilding since. And to be fair, I think like after everything, I feel so much better. And I got a few things in the pipeline, working toward the date and just waiting for confirmation on a few things. But yeah, it's looking good that you'll see me back fighting very soon.
You must be itching to fight again now, mate, because obviously
always.
But do you think that break has also done you a bit of good, because you've always been quite active?
It was one of them things where if I didn't take a break, it wasn't really a choice at that point. It got to the point where to be fair, I ended up going out for food, and it was either I had the surgery after that, or There is no or really. It was at
Yeah.
the point where I was having problems where I was literally getting dislocations while I was sat out for food. So
Jesus.
it was just it wasn't good. So we got it done, and it's all good.
Recovering well though, mate. Yeah.
Oh, mate, loads better. I've been live since I got to California, April the 6th, sparring and different things, and I've been helping Josh Emmett with his prep for his fight against Qatar. Training with another one of my friend whose fight's not been released yet, but it's a very, very big fight for him. And I'm training with a few of the boys from the gym and different things. So, yeah, like sparring's been going really well, and I feel really, really good. I feel really good. So,
Can
I just ask, what's it like training with Josh Emmett? To me, he's someone that's been hugely underrated, I think, and overlooked for many years. What's it like training with someone that actually is hugely experienced?
Oh, he hits so hard. He just the power in his hands, not anything else, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I haven't really had to worry about someone hitting that hard since I used to box and spar with Jamie Cox. Like, if you switch off at any point and he catches you, like, he's sending you for a nap. Like, so it is very good for me. I really much do enjoy that sparring, and I'm still, like, even though I have been cutting quite heavily the last couple of weeks, I'm still floating in like the welterweight range. So like, I've got a bit of a size advantage on him, but fitness wise, my fitness is good at the minute. So we've had some very, very good sparring now. It's been fun.
Yeah, because he's someone that always comes with good fitness, doesn't he? He's always well prepared. Doesn't look like someone that's ever getting himself out of shape in between camps. I don't know. I could be getting the wrong impression
here.
He's
a big boy. He's a very big boy. Like, the weight he cuts, he never stays out of shape because he cuts so much weight anyway. Like, I know he cuts a lot for featherweight. So
yeah.
That's going to be a fight and a half. Like the Qatar fight, it's going to be an absolute banger. Like with you, Mace, are you whenever you get your fight sorted, is it most likely going to be over there, or any chance we may see you take a trip over here at some point?
I'm trying my best.
Gotta ask. But
I said, it should only be a week or two, hopefully, before we start hearing something. So it'll be good.
Nice. There's a real feel good. There's just a really good feeling about Welsh sport and combat sports and everything at the moment. Like, obviously we talked about the football, which I don't want to harp on too much about, but obviously going to the World Cup again, for the first time in like 60 years. So we've got to talk about it a little bit. But obviously you've got like all the Welsh boys like yourself and that in the UFC and Cage Warriors and Bellator. It's going well. And then you've got obviously Joe Cordina won a world title at a boxing.
Crazy win last night.
Oh, it was insane. That knockout.
Flash.
If you're going to win a world title, there's worse ways to do it, isn't there? Jesus. It was really impressive. And we're going to go into that in a bit more detail later when Ben joins us. But
I think that's the cleanest knockout of his career. That is definitely the cleanest knockout of his career.
100%. And I mean, like, the guy, even he tried to get up, but he just kind of wobbled about and just looked completely out of it. But have you seen the thing from yesterday? I think it was last night. There was a fight I think it was boxing in South Africa. And these two guys are fighting. And the one guy knocks the other guy down, and the ref kind of lets he gets back up and whatever. But then when the ref tells him to re-engage, the guy who had knocked him down, he just like goes completely blank and turns and starts walking down the ref. So it was quite frightening, mate, to watch, because it was like he just completely lost it. It's very hard to describe without seeing the video. But
it's delayed knockouts there. They're delayed knockouts, so it's where you get hit with a big shot and you get rocked a little bit. Your brain doesn't quite know it's gone to sleep yet. So
it was strange. I think he was almost in a dream state, because you're right. He did. He started locking onto the referee, went towards the referee. The referee got out of the way, and then he started fighting an imaginary person in the corner. That was a bit haunting, a bit strange. He's throwing punches at someone that wasn't there.
Yeah.
Really, really odd behaviour.
Do you reckon
a bit
that's
disturbing?
Do you think that's from like repeated, like obviously I think they were about 9 rounds into the fight. So do you reckon that's from just repeated hits to the head? Is it?
It can be from one. It can definitely be from one. Yeah, it's like sometimes you'll see it where you'll see it, like it happens in UFC a few times where people's been hit and then they've come out the pocket, they've moved down a little bit, and all of a sudden then they just go. And it's literally just where there's just a little delay in the sensor of your brain knowing that it's done, sort of thing.
Painful. Yeah, hopefully he's all right. I haven't heard anything, any news on what he was like afterwards, but hopefully he was all right because it was a very weird one. You also got your fellow Welsh person in Corey McKenna's out there as well training. She came into the studio actually for a chat with me just before she went back. Everything going well with you guys in terms of just day-to-day training and stuff? Obviously, you're training with high-level guys out in the States. Are you glad, or are you still still happy and like you still think you made the right decision to go out there?
Oh, always. Yeah. Like sparring partner-wise is insane. Like I said, I mean, with Josh, Chris Gonzalez is my main training partner out here who fights in Bellator. He's got a big fight coming up, which will be announced soon. It's really going to start getting him noticed. I've been training down CSA a lot. Obviously, a well-renowned striking gym. People like Cejudo and different places trained out of there. Training with Gaston, Dream Killer. Obviously, training under Danny Castillo. Like I said, Emmett's here. Darren Elkin's still about. Andre's coming back after his last loss, and Mike Malott popped in for training for a bit. Slava trains. Like there's bodies here, definitely. There's quite a lot of injuries here at the moment, but to be fair, I'm getting more than enough sparring and more than enough bodies.
Is it? I don't know. Like, is it? My geography's notoriously bad, by the way, so you'll have to excuse me if I say something ridiculous. But I was going to say, is it easier? So, like, one thing which Danny talks about a lot is getting his fighters to go to different gyms so they can, learn off different coaches. They can spar with different people. Is that easier in the States because there's so many more gyms around, or is it harder because you've got to travel further?
It's not so much harder because you got to travel further. It's just finding high quality gyms anywhere is a bit of a nightmare. In the UK, like obviously I complain about it a lot with sparring partners, but I can always drive to St. Joe's to get good high level boxing sparring. There was gyms in Cardiff I could go to. There was gyms over the border in Bristol I could go to. So it's a bit similar, to be fair, because there's gyms everywhere, but it's just finding high quality opponents. Like US is spread out a lot more, but I got people in Tam, there's people in Dublin I can drive to. And then like high level gyms, they obviously Stockton's not far away. I could drive to. It's a 2-hour drive, an hour drive. And then there's other places. There's always places you can go. Melendez's gym is literally near San Francisco, which is near Dublin as well. Like there's more than enough. But to be fair, it's about finding out what works. Like this far out from a fight, which I am. You're at that point, especially coming back from an injury where you just want to partners with guys who can be high level. You don't end up marked up. Like I end up with no bruises, which for me is rare because I am like old fruit. But you're finding guys who are going to look after you. Like that's the big thing is you go to other gyms and there's still that stupid mentality of like needing to know whose gym it is, and it's like fuck that. Do you know what I mean? I don't have time for shit like that. Like if you want to come at me like we're gonna fight, then we can fight. There's no dramas. Like I'll happily put you to sleep. But you don't learn from that. Like it takes years off your career, and I'm at that point where I just want to enhance my abilities any way I can. Like I'm not a type of person who shies away from a fight, so I don't really need that a lot of time. I just need those technical bouts where I always have that fight where I can dig deeper, but I'm always trying to learn. And some of the guys I'm training with out here, they're perfect, to be fair.
Danny, what do you think is the most beneficial things for fighters like Mason and that, whether you're getting to train with, the higher level sparring partners and stuff? Like, how big of a difference does that make to you in your day-to-day training?
Yeah, I mean, they need to be pushed. They need to try and find out answers to as many questions about their game in training and not actually on the job. Although on the job is always going to present some difficulties, and hopefully yourself with your experience and your corner with its experience, you can adapt and change to the needs of the fight accordingly. But you know, you want to get as many of those questions answered as possible. We're always trying to evolve ourselves. It's nice hearing Mason talking about trying to better himself at all times and not just wanting dogfights in the gym. And again, that's a really difficult thing when you've got so much testosterone, you've got so many people trying to protect images. You know, there can be some ego issues. But yeah, trying to put those egos to one side and get like-minded people at a high level, you know, that's the key. And sometimes you do have to travel around to get that. Yeah, I can't back up enough for high-level guys to go around to other gyms to train. And you know, we've been very much trying to invite people in. We do it every Tuesday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We have some of the Welsh lads come up. We have people come from all over. It's monitored by 3 different coaches to make sure that no sparring gets out of hand. And it works very, very well. Yeah, I think you've got to have assertive coaching along with the environment to make sure things don't get out of hand. There's got to be some kind of...
Tell people to grow up repeatedly.
Yeah. There has got to be that. Yeah. It's a balancing act. It really is. But yeah, that's part of the challenge as well. But you got to be in search to find your way.
Team Alpha Male, Team Alpha Male. Like, I watch the sparring on Wednesdays, and there's some people who spar, and it's literally like I'm watching it. I'm like, where's the fucking point? Like, yeah. I don't understand. Like, there's people in the gym I see day in, day out, like deliberately injuring people and stuff. And it's like, and that's not a Team Alpha Male thing, because it's usually not the people, it's some of the people who come in, but it's just like, it's just so cutthroat. And it's like, I'm just not about that. Like, to be fair, if someone cuts me in training from doing something stupid, I'm probably going to fight you at the end of it, because you're costing me money, you're costing my career. Like, I scar enough that if you're doing something stupid and you end up causing injury to me, like, we're gonna fight. That's it. Like, because I don't have that long in a career where I can take these risks, where I can take these injuries and still think I'll be fine. Like, it's just stupid. Like, I've seen people do it for years. Like, I've been in the gym. November for me will be 20 years training. I've been in the gym lifetimes compared to some people, and like, I'm looking to always to perfect every day, always to learn. Which means that random people come in day to day. I always ready to listen. If someone's got something to say, I'll always listen and see if I can take anything. It's the whole beg, steal, and mentality where I'm always asking. I'm always looking what's new. I'm always asking and perfect. Exactly what I'm saying. It's always looking for that next thing. And closing those doors of mistakes that I'm making day in, day out, those things that I've made mistakes with for years. Because there's always going to be something to improve on. There's always an area where you need to tighten up. There's always an area which can have stuff added in. And sometimes it's just different flavors, whether it doesn't work for you or not. It's good just to know that if you ever do need it, you have it in your back pocket, so that if something isn't working, your style completely is getting countered, then you just be like, oh, I'll just change it up. I've done this before, and you can just go to just change the style completely to whatever fits.
Interesting stuff. I was going to ask both of you, but I'll ask you first, mate. So, is there many people? See, I always think of it as, or I always envisage it as like, an MMA gym or a boxing gym or whatever. Like, you get sparring, and maybe once in a while it might get a bit, bit rough or a bit over the top because you've got so much testosterone and stuff. But like, generally, there can't be many people who walk in there with trying to sort of, injure someone or get it to like a genuine fight. But it does sound like both of you have had some level of experience of people going in there with that attitude. So I'm kind of, I don't know. I suppose I'm a bit surprised, maybe.
There's idiots in every area of life. And no matter what area you go into, you can walk into a shop and you can see people being idiots, and you can work in finance and deal with people being idiots day in, day out. It's just an area, and like MMA is one of those areas where you attract people who they have to be willing to sacrifice a lot to be good, and they have to be of a certain mindset. And obviously, you do get the type of people who they've drunk too much of their own Kool-Aid, and they get a little bit sort of selfish in their goals. I like to call it the Mike Tyson mentality, because obviously Mike Tyson was famous in sparring for his coaches would literally pay people off the street to come in to get knocked out, and a lot of people still have that mentality where as long as they looked after, they don't care about looking after their training partners, and it's something I've never liked. And I've always said, if I come out of a sparring session with my training partners knowing that I've even caused bruises to my sparring partner, then I know I've done something wrong, because like, especially with like the kit we wear and the different things and like the way you should be padding and stuff, and obviously accidents happen, like I can throw a cross and they can step in and we can have that clash of the car crash happen, but you should always be in control enough. Like, you should always be able to. I throw spin hook kicks in training. I'll throw a spin hook kick and I'll either send it over your head or I'll pull it. And I've never had one instant where I've ended up clipping someone on if I didn't mean to. Same with turns. Like, I'll throw a 45 to a head, and I'll know that if your glove isn't there, I'll pull it last minute. And if you don't have that leg control, then why are you sparring when you should be training and working to develop it? Same with wrestling. Like, you should be able to pick, like, my training partner's a good one. He's a D1 All-American. Like, his wrestling, we've literally gone head to head and had really close exchanges. And as soon as I felt that point where I'm past that PNR, that point of no return, you straight away you're looking to start that next part of the scramble. You're looking to, as soon as I make contact with him, to explode up. And he's literally like mid-air, like slowed the impact so that we can absorb it and then start killing, and then we go straight away again. And it's like, where you don't always have to be buried, even if it's a high impact environment where it's tight. There's that give and take, and you make it as realistic as possible, but you're all about creating it. It isn't always about taking damage. Like, that should always be minimized.
Yeah, interesting. I could listen to that all day. Like, Danny, what about you, mate? Obviously, as you're seeing it now these days as a coach, but I mean, back when you were a fighter as well, did you have any issues with that sort of mentality coming in?
Yeah, I actually don't think I was coached too well for my first onset of my MMA career, and I think largely because perhaps wasn't knowing how to coach someone well. So just to try to be more precise in what I'm saying, there was obviously a lot less gyms of MMA in their entirety back 2 decades ago, and also it was quite difficult weight-wise. There was less weight divisions. I used to have to fight my first handful of fights at 70 kilos when I was walking around at 64, so it wasn't idyllic anyway. But I remember my coach was taking me to other gyms to spar kickboxing rounds, literally with whoever was there. And the times I'd come away with banging headaches. I was sparring with people 20 kilos heavier. I remember asking these lads, where are you from? They were from the Russian circuit doing kickboxing, and they was residing over here briefly at the time. And my coach just stuck me in there, albeit we did have headgear on, but my God, it was a horrific experience. So, it's a little bit different. It's a different era to how it is now. I kind of perhaps... There was no other avenue. If you wanted to spar hard, I had to kind of just jump in with people regardless of weights, and I had to do individual formats because there just wasn't the breadth of MMA capabilities. But there is still issues there, like Mason Jones is talking about, and I absolutely agree that you got to pick who you sort of spar with. And I think a lot of it could be down to how people portray you. And Mason, your fights. Although they're very technical to a technical,
they're always a war.
Technician. Yeah, but they're war. But if you slow them down, but there are some really beautiful parts of it. If you actually slow it down, you can actually see that there's some really good in pocket work there. But perhaps because people see that, they probably expect a war in return, even in training. But people have got to understand that when you spar, you're not trying to just emulate what all your strengths are. You're trying to work on weaknesses and trying to add new skill sets in your game. It's a hard one.
It's weird because it's that whole mentality where sometimes where you'll be touching them up and you're catching them in places and you're not even hitting them hard, but they're getting overwhelmed. And then rather than sort of think I'll try and handle this with technique, they start digging deeper and they start hitting harder and they start sort of trying to power their way out of it, which is all good. But it's like, I've literally just kicked you in the chin 3 times and pulled it. I was like, do you really think if I wanted to, like, you would still be in this part of the fight? And you get it no matter where you're in. Like, I remember back when I was pro boxing, I did boxing camps in London because I was struggling getting boxing sparring for my own weight. And I remember I turned up, and the first sentence they literally said is like, "Oh, these boys in here to mess around." And they're telling them like, "Oh, send him home." And it's literally like you're in there with someone like just trying to kill you. And they like I've like I said, even then I was an experienced head, and I knew how to break people, how to stay tight, how to avoid damage, and how to wear people down, and then proper when they start getting sick, proper start putting it on them. But I actually, one of the times I was there, one of my camps, I remember these boys come in, and they travelled down for sparring as well. And there was a boy there, and he had made his debut, his pro debut. He'd had a couple of amateur fights, but you could tell he was still green. And I remember the Turks I was training with just smirking, and the coach saying something to him, and they went in, and I think it was like the 3rd or 4th shot just broke the boy's nose. Started just literally just putting it on him. There was blood everywhere, and it's just like, oh yeah, grip brilliant. You go home and tell their wife that they're knocking people out in training. And now I look at him, and the boy's career was knocking people out. He's like, I think he's like 15-4, 15-5, where obviously he had like 10 gifts as they give him in pro boxing, and then started fighting decent people, and just they can't take it when they have it back. And it's like I've never understood it, because like some people need harder sparring where they need to be put under pressure. They don't need the big impacts. They need to be put under pressure, and they need to be sort of shark tanked to the point where they need to be able to see a punch coming down. They need to be able to look it down, because you can have the most technical guys in the world, but if they can't get to that point where they're dealing with someone like Darren Elkins is a perfect example. Darren Elkins isn't the most technical in the world. He's nowhere near the most athletic. He literally looks like 10 years older than he is. But what he is brilliant at is making it a dirty fight and making it a horrendous fight to you, and putting pressure on someone to the point where they break. And like when you're not used to that, when you're not used to someone who's literally just going to pull you in a hole and keep you there for 3 fights, then it is a completely different experience. But again, you don't need those heavy impact sparring rounds. You don't need time taken off your clock from getting your bell rung in training because someone decided that they're going to prove a point by trying to put holes in you. And like you see it no matter what level you are, and you do. And like when you start hearing of people like Max Holloway and different places who don't actually spar anymore, because they've done enough in training for years, and things like some people will never be able to emulate that, but it's something like you want to get to eventually, where you have that ability where you look good without having the hard sparring. If they do, like, they'll do technical sparring, is brilliant, but they never really get in clip with these hard shots, and like I said, take a time off their clock.
I'd like to know your opinion. So you're on that Holloway. When he come out and made that statement, I had a terrible trouble trying to get certain fighters, I'm not talking many of them, that no longer, they said, well, we're not going to spar anymore. And it was, I mean, they were pro level fighters. I just don't want to go giving out their names or anything, but I had a lot of trouble where I constantly had to debate with them. I said, well, look, you're not Max Holloway. You still need to get in there. And it's like, unfortunately, some people hear things like this and take it to the extreme and take it upon themselves to mimic what they do. But the question I want to put to you... Even
when he said that, I still think he was doing technical sparring. So even though he made impact, I still think he was doing technical sparring, because like you still need to find ways to emulate. Like obviously, I just think he meant he wasn't having the heavy sparring with things. He wasn't, because like there's a problem I found in gyms I've trained at as well, where people do shadow sparring to warm up, and it's big in all the gyms. I don't shadow spar at all anymore. I don't do any of it. Shadow sparring. It always has to be light contact, touch work, and again, I even struggle with, like, I train with flyweights and bantamweights. I trained with a flyweight not long ago, and we was having lovely just touch sparring all the way through, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he just threw a big overhand right and clipped me in the chin, and because I wasn't expecting it, I was relaxed, my chin was relaxed. He nearly rung me, and I was so pissed off at it, because I was thinking, you're 125 pound, like I'm walking around at the moment, I'm like 175, 180 pound, and like I'm touch sparring, like we had no problems, and all of a sudden you'll just throw a big shot out of nowhere and think like that's just cool. And it's like, it is difficult training with people, and knowing that you can trust your training partner. And I'm very hesitant in training with new people, training with new gyms, even though I've done it for years. Whereas I'll go and like if we usually go, I prefer to go with groups of people so that I can watch and spectate a little bit first, and I can choose who I'm training with, because you just get people and they chase titles, and they just want they want to be able to tell people back home, oh yeah, I sparred with so and so, he's not that good. Like I remember I trained in Tam years ago, and Kevin Lee come out when he was looking for new gyms, and he came out and trained. And I remember speaking to Kevin after we sparred jiu-jitsu, and we rolled, and I remember him saying like he was having a nightmare because everyone was just trying to have a piece of him. Like he hadn't had any like the rolls, everyone was trying to kill him, and he ended up obviously going to TriStar because they prioritized him. But you get that, you get people chasing that name. Like obviously Habib, if Habib comes to your gym, like people want to do wrestling, and they're going to do two things: they're either going to shy away from it, or they're going to be like, oh, let's see how good the guy really is. And it's that sort of alpha male mentality. I know it's the wrong gym. I'm saying the wrong gym to say it, but you just don't hate it so much anymore. I just find it so old fashioned where, like I said, McGregor actually said something well where he said, upgrade the software without damaging the hardware, which is brilliant because he was the whole priority of that gym. So that people were brought in to spar with him. He was the one looked after. But I guarantee you, like people like Russ Hammer and all he was training with, I guarantee McGregor was hitting them with big shots repeatedly, if not in certain parts of sparring, because he was the priority. And it is that difficulty of finding your ways to improve without, like I said, taking those impacts. And I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing or not. I tried still trying to get a mix of where I get under pressure without sort of losing those time off my clock. But who really knows what the right answer is, whether Max Holloway is doing the right thing or not. Like, since he came out and said that statement, he had that really good fight with Qatar, and then his last couple of fights, obviously against high-level opponents, he's still been up there, but he hasn't been winning quite as much. He lost twice to Volkanovski and different things. So,
yeah,
again,
because
who
Mason,
knows whether...
The thing I wanted to ask you really, as you go back around mentioning Holloway, was that, you know, since he come out and made those statements, you know, you could really argue he's been hit more than he's ever been hit in recent fights. Now, okay, I understand the caliber of the fighters he's fighting at top tier, but would you agree that you think that perhaps he's been in more wars in terms of showing it on his face than ever before? And I think that could come from, you know, what kind of sparring is he doing? Yeah, you might be doing this touch sparring, but maybe he needs a little balance of some of that realistic sparring to him. Yeah.
I really agree with you. Like, everything's individual, and like I said, it's just so hard finding out what works and what's the right answer, because like I've still done camps, I've done really hard camps, and had coaches ride me and like have me doing more and more and more, and then I turn up that to the fight, and we've gone to that week where we've had a light for a week, and by the time the fight comes out, because I've pushed for so long, you have that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday where I felt great. I felt really good. And then when it starts getting late, like that Thursday and Friday, everything starts catching up on you, because like you need to pay a debt eventually. That overtraining debt and that sort of recovery debt. Whereas, does that mean you push harder on the Monday and the Tuesday again then, and you make those still hard working days, and then you sort of try and get that peak in right? Or the Alan Patrick fight is probably the last fight where I think I really peaked at the right time. And obviously he knew that and found a way out. The last fight I had a lot of injuries, and the Mike Davis was sort of, it was a fight where it was a really learning experience for the 2 weeks isolation and different things, and the mistakes I made in camp, which I think added up to me taking that loss. And even though it was a close fight, and I still get people now saying, we think you should, like, we still count you as undefeated. I had 3 men that day to impress. 3 men, and I was the 3 judges, or 3 women if they were there. The three judges, and obviously I didn't do it on the day, and that's all that matters, because that goes down in the history books. And the Alan Patrick fight, I made mistakes in that fight. Obviously the eye poke was one, but the other thing was I gave him a way out by not following up and not giving the making the ref do his job. And like, again, they're all learning experiences, no mistakes, but it's the main thing I take from these fights is how I felt in those fights. Like the Alan Patrick fight, I had the biggest weight cut I've ever done to date, bigger than the welterweight title fight I had. and I felt so good. Whereas like the last fight I did, on top of the injuries, I did the smallest weight cut I've ever done, and I felt terrible. I had my energy levels were terrible. I had what was basically a flu. I had the injuries, and I had a problem with my chest as well. So it was just literally, we got in there, and my coaches were like, "Oh, you feeling okay?" I'm like, "Yeah." My boxing coach was looking at me. I was like, "Oh no." I was like, "Oh, it'll be fine." Hit him with 5 shots, and remember that I completely emptied the tank after 5 shots. And then it was just literally like, we go back in the corner, and I'd won the round by wrestling, and my coaches were like, "Oh, you were close for a couple of sparring rounds." And I was like, yeah. And as soon as I knew they weren't going to be televising it live, I was like, I'm in a bad place. And my coach said, "Well, just win." So we did. And sometimes, like, it's a good experience. I've said this quote for years before, which is a Derek Lewis quote. And he said, like, it doesn't matter whether you're 90%, whether you're 80%, 70, all the way down. All that matters is you win. And like, you look at people like John Jones, obviously before the steroids, whenever he did, because it completely ruined his legacy for me. Because otherwise, I think he would have been one of the best to date. And the amount of title fights he had, whereas he won, was insane. Like, title fights where they're not just random fights where you get given the name 8 weeks out there, where people's been working towards you. You are the pinnacle, and people are coming towards you, or you're fighting against what the pinnacle is. And to win, you can't tell me in his 12 title fights he had, he felt 100% in every single one of those fights, or even 90%. Like, he's gone into those fights feeling terrible. Like, I think the Dominic Reyes fight, I think he 100% didn't perform in that fight. I think he felt terrible, yet he still won. And whether you can argue it, say, "Oh yeah, the Dominic Reyes fight, I had it the other way." I was like, "Yeah, but you're not the important people in there. There's 3 people you have to convince, and the 3 people he managed to convince." So whether it was right or wrong, like, he did what he needed to do, and that is what makes great athletes. It isn't always the big knockouts and things. It's being able to grind a win out is so important.
You see it in all sports, don't you? A lot of, like, football or boxing or anything, is the very top level elite athletes and teams, is they find a way to win when things aren't going their way, or when they're not having their best day, or, you know, they're struggling or whatever. And I think that's sometimes the difference between someone who's good and someone who's great, I would say.
Always.
But obviously, I've not been an athlete myself. Or should I say a retired athlete, I should say, really, shouldn't I? No. I was going to ask you, Mason, just about, like, in your own words, really, to assess your UFC run so far. Obviously, you've had the 3 fights, 2.5 fights, I guess, so far, but you kind of just did it anyway as you were talking then. With that Alan Patrick fight, do you feel like you'd like to face him again at some point, or do you feel like
decapitate is the term? Decapitate is the term. I'd love to decapitate Alan Patrick. Yeah, if he's not cut after Michael Johnson, send him into a different planet. Yeah, I'd love to decapitate that man. He's bummed out of 2 fights for me. And I think it's a good story for the UFC, and it's a good fight for me. Like, considering we went into that fight preparing for someone who's going to be my strongest opponent to date. And I threw him around like a flower girl. So, yeah, it's definitely a good fight for me, and it's definitely something I want to revisit in the future. It's definitely something I'll be calling for after my next fight, to fight him again. Because, again, I'm getting paid. I'm getting paid the pay I am. So why would I want to fight high-level guys when a win against these sort of guys earns me the same as a win against a high-level guy does, with the risk causing the same again? You've seen people like, again, we talk about Kevin Lee and people like these. Kevin Lee fought high-level opponents all the way through, was fighting the best of the best. And they ended up parting ways with the UFC because of his win-loss record. They didn't take into fact the caliber of guys he's fighting. And eventually I'm going to get to that. Like, I'm still adamant that I'm going to be the best in the world. I still see it every morning when I go to bed. I still see it every morning when I wake up, that I am going to be the best in the world. I think I am the best in the world. I just got a lot to do to make everyone see it. And it's just work. And something I've never been afraid of is hard work and technical work, and I'm working on the areas I need work on every day, and all it matters is a good game plan, a good bit of timing, and throwing things at the right time, and you're going to see me start to get a win streak. And I've had teething problems. That was the way I put my first 3 fights. Teething problems. Like I said, I'm no novice, I'm no green thumb by any chance, but I made mistakes, stupid mistakes in every single one of those fights, every single one. And I just need to make the next one a masterpiece.
Indeed, mate. Just before we let you go, mate, you mentioned there about mistakes. Are you someone who looks back with frustration at those mistakes in hindsight, or are you someone that you just learn from them and forget about them?
Put it this way, when I lost my debut in the UFC and lost my undefeated status, I didn't get upset. I was annoyed with myself, but literally by the time I got out of the cage, it was done. It was done in my mind, and all it is you work on what's to improve on. I had a lot of things and a lot of mistakes. I think when we narrowed it down, I read up 12 points, which were all big deciders in that fight. 12 points of things that had gone wrong for me and things I did wrong. Like an easy one was every time I shot him for a takedown, I was going under the arse, and then when I was entering in, I was climbing up. So Mike didn't even have to defend. He didn't have to sprawl because I was literally just going body to body with him instead of finishing the takedown on the level that I'd ended. All I needed was literally to stay on that level, to change the direction and to chain onto it, and I would have finished those takedowns and would have decided the fight. I was too busy worrying about the scoring, where I was trying to outscore someone than I was trying to just put holes in someone. Could have decided the fight. I rocked him with shots where I was only scoring, and if I'd really put my hips to it, I think I would have caused a lot more damage. And it's just a lot of things I did wrong. I let him work at certain times, even though we knew exactly after the first round what his game plan was going to be. I still let him do what he was going to do. I'd run leading up to it too much in the point where I burnt my legs out, thinking that I had to make sure that I was going to still worry about my weight. I made weight easy and ended up struggling to move my legs then because I fatigued my legs so much. And it's just a lot of stupid shit. A lot of shit where you're looking back, you're like, well, how can you allow something like that to happen? The Alan Patrick fight. So the Alan Patrick fight, I actually cut more weight than I ever had before. And after the night, the night before weigh-ins, I ended up taking a recovery shot, which the PI recommended for people to take to stop cramping, which works fine if people only have a few pounds to lose. I still had like 10 pounds to cut, and I remember taking this shot and wake up the next day and my weight just refusing to move. And like looking back on it, and it's like, well, you have this caliber of people. If I spoke to them and said like, I've still got this amount of work, like, do you think this is a good idea? Then they probably would have told me no. But it doesn't matter. None of it matters anymore. All it matters is working to improve the next performance and tightening up what's there and having these smart fights. Like Danny said, he's on about Holloway where he's wearing more in these fights. And I think it is that mentality of trying to be too exciting sometimes. If you look at Khabib's record all the way through, or look at Islam, the way he took about Dan Hooker, like he come out and he just waited. He waited for him to throw a kick. He kept him at range and waited for him to throw a kick. And as soon as he did, he hit that double. He timed it perfect. And then that was the end of the fight. And you look at Oliveira. He wears his shots. But someone said, I was watching an interview before, and they said he almost has a boxing 10 count every time he gets knocked down because people are so afraid of his jiu-jitsu. And it's like, that's going to work against a lot of people, but it's not going to work against Islam. If Islam manages to rock him the way he does, I think Islam's going to finish him. And I do think Islam is going to beat Oliveira, even though I would love Oliveira to win that fight. I think Islam is going to run through him. But it's interesting. I think like the lightweight is one of the most explosive divisions because you have the fast, the agileness of the featherweights. You have a bit more power into them where you have that one knockout power and that strength difference while still being athletic. And I do think lightweight is the most exciting division in the UFC. Obviously, we all like to see the big boys bang, but when you get a mix of that and the athleticness, it's good to watch.
Yeah, it's a good mix of skills and power, isn't it? I think it's certainly makes for exciting fights. Right, then, Mace, we'll let you go by your day because obviously it's a bit earlier there than it is here.
Right, it's 10 to 1.
Lunchtime. Yeah, food time. Appreciate you joining us, mate. I know you're busy and stuff and training and everything, so I appreciate you finding the time, my friend.
It's all good. I appreciate the invite. And again, sorry for being late.
No, you're honest. Oh, Danny's always late anyway, mate. Danny's always late. Cheers.
Mason, good luck, buddy.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Take it easy, mate.
Went too fast.
Yeah, it went really quick. One of the reasons I love having Mason on as well, though, is I don't have to talk because he loves having a good old chin wag.
He's definitely natural.
You just got to ask him a couple of questions, and he goes into the detail himself. Like you haven't got to.
I still maintain.
Probe him for questions.
For
more details. If you know what I mean.
That Mike Davis fight, I still think he edged it. I can't help it. And that's really, we're trying to look at it unbiasedly. I still think he beat that Mike Davis.
Don't you love his attitude, though, mate? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you think he won.
No, it's broke it down on areas which could. Yeah,
literally the judges, and I think that's such a. Not many. I don't think a lot of fighters have got that attitude. To be honest with you. Because I think they cling to the thing, everyone thinks I won that fight. I should have won that fight. And the judges didn't think it. But his attitude was, well, the judges didn't think I won it. So that's all that matters. And I think that is what matters. Attitude.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a winner's attitude. He doesn't want that to happen again. So he critiques. And like he said, he broke down 3 key points of what he could have done better in that fight on reasons why it was as close as it was in a way that it went against him. Yeah, it's an obsessive mindset. Now, I've got a few of those characters in the gym, not to keep boasting about their names, so I won't mention, but there's some that always utterly impress me. We finished training. It's been 3 or 4 hours on the mat, and why everyone's going into banter mode as they get undressed and start heading down towards the showers. That they're on the mat looking at the pad work that they just filmed to warm down from the session, trying to critique their guard. That sort of behaviour really, really impresses me. And really, that's going to be the thing that separates the really good athletes from the best athletes. And, the ones that really do shine above. Yeah. And they're the ones that really you're going to see who sit around that top 5 for more than 2-3 years. They're the kind of athletes that are looking back at their game, watching the footage into their sparring in the sessions, and looking back at obviously their fights that they've had, and trying to find ways to make less mistakes.
Indeed, mate. So Ben's going to join us in just a second. What stood out for you last night from the UFC? So I've got to be honest, I haven't had time to watch any of these fights, so I haven't seen any UFC from last night.
Yeah, I think the star for performance was that Evliov against Dan Iggy or Ig. I don't know we say his name different each time. I'm sure we do, but Dan Ig. I mean, he's a great athlete all around. He's just in a pool of absolute predators, and this Evliov is proving to be such one. He could strike, he could grapple, he can wrestle, but he can also strategize as well. He seems to be able to fight against people where they have a different difficult area to deal with. He seems to find a way around it where he's not taking any damage from them. And a really, really impressive performance. But I'm pleased to see Volkov coming back on winning ways, looking really, really convincing over Rosenstruck. Rosenstruck could be a difficult customer for any, but Volkov really maximised his length from reach. He didn't have much reach advantage. It's only 2-inch. 78 over 80, so not a lot of reach advantage really, but he utilized his height and range. It was a beautiful performance. So Volkov impressed me, but this Evliov, he's going to pose problems to people for sure.
I've seen a few people on social media, I don't want to say reveling, but certainly weren't disappointed to see Ashkar Moskarov, who lost to Alonzo Minefield, because it had come out in the build-up, I think, to this fight that Moskarov, who was unbeaten, had actually, his record wasn't quite as accurate as what everyone thought. So he had quite a padded record. And then they put him in with Alonzo Minefield, who's an absolute killer. And he dispatched him comfortably. So we're going to switch sports, as it were, and we're going to talk a bit of boxing now with Mr. Ben Doughty. Welcome. How are you, my friend?
What's happening, guys?
Feel like we got loads to discuss tonight, Ben. It's difficult to know where to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you about that the fight in South Africa, just to kind of throw the cat amongst the pigeons, as it were, because this one of the more bizarre clips I've seen on social media in the recent weeks. It was very strange. I tried to describe it earlier. I don't think I did a great job of it when we were talking to Mason, but it was bizarre, Ben, to see, and hopefully the guy's all right, because it's got to be worrying to see something like that.
Yeah, it was bizarre. People who've been in the fight game a long time and watching it a long time seem unanimous that they've never seen anything quite like it. For anyone who didn't know what went down, it was an African lightweight title fight in Durban. It was billed as today, as in Sunday, June the 5th. So I'm not sure how long ago it took place, a few hours, whatever. And there was a guy, the names are hard to pronounce, I'll be honest, but the guy in question, the central protagonist in this, was called Simiso Buthelezi or something like that. And it was obviously a close, hard contested fight. And it was the 10th round, and he knocked his opponent out through ropes out of the ring, but took a shot in the kind of exchange, it would appear. And then next minute, the guy gets up, from having been outside the ring or on the apron, his opponent, and the referee waves him in, and he initially turns and faces the referee and looks and ambles a bit like a guy floundering, like a sleepwalker in the mud or something, and goes towards the referee. The referee kind of steps out of the way, and this guy starts swinging punches at the corner post, and it looks like he's just lost all cognizance of where he is and his surroundings, and he's flailing at some unknown adversary while his opponent is ready to resume the contest, and it's very late in the 10th round, I believe, as well, agonisingly late in the 10th and final round, from what I understand. And the referee waves it off, and, he's really got no choice but to wave it off, given such bizarre behaviour. And, a few people have said, oh, that's corrupt, I'm not having that. But Danny, Simon, please, you're going to fix a fight, right? We're all men coming from some sort of combat sports awareness. You're going to fix it like that, aren't you? You're going to say, maybe Danny want to rig a fight in the cage or in the ring and say, tell you what we'll do, right, Danny? We'll have the guys that we've, bet heavily on to lose. He'll be winning the fight, and it'll be really genuinely hard all the way through. Then we want him to start flailing away at nobody. That'll throw people off the scent and won't invite any suspicion whatsoever. You just wouldn't do it, would you?
No. And I think Mason suggested that he thought maybe it was one of those where it was like the brain's late reaction. So if he got caught in the exchange, the brain didn't quite register, and then in the time it took to get him up and get him to re-engage, surely it must have been something like that. Or if he had taken a lot of damage throughout the 9 rounds or 10, nearly 10 rounds, maybe that was it. But I got to be honest, it's not nice to see, because for me anyway, my automatic thing is I think of some sort of brain injury, whether it's like not a minor brain injury, but hopefully it's something minor as opposed to something.
Yeah, because the MMA version, we've seen this numerous times, haven't we, Si, where someone gets knocked out, and as they come to, they start trying to wrestle the ref. Yeah, it's called wrestling up, when you go from the ground and you try to stand up. They start wrestling up the ref. And it can take a couple of officials to break it up.
There was one in I forget the name of the company. It's a British MMA company, and the guy gets knocked out, and he ends up putting the ref in a heel hook, and he has it fully locked in, and there's like judges and officials trying to get him to break it, but he's so out of it, and he's kind of on autopilot, and he's grabbed the ref's ankle thinking that the fight's still going on, and he's not even registering. And
I think if we'd have seen the guy who got knocked through the ring start behaving like that, we'd have found it a lot more easier to process and understand. It's the fact that it was the guy winning the fight that seemed to be, in ascendance, and then suddenly, when the referee waves it on, that happens. I've heard there's a top trainer in South Africa. He's basically the most well-known trainer in South Africa. His name's Colin Nathan. He says that the fighter in question is responsive and stable at the minute. I believe he's under some sort of checks in hospital. Good. So it sounds like he's okay at the minute. Very odd.
Indeed. So it's been a very happy day for us Welsh people, Ben. And it kind of started last night, I got to be honest. There was an event in Cardiff. Joe Cordina fought a Gower for the world title. And there was also a couple of other Welsh lads who fought on the undercard and stuff, which they also did very well. But Joe Cordina took the headlines, and if you're going to win a world title, it was effectively a one-punch knockout, wasn't it? I know he hit him slightly before, but
well, no, it was absolutely. It was. I wouldn't even say effectively. I would say it was undeniably a one-punch knockout. It was that jab to the chest, right hand over the top. He said he's been practicing it, and he said him and his trainer Tony Sims call it the Roberto Duran. It's some sort of homage to the great Panamanian fighter. You know what? I'm struggling to think of too many British fighters who ever won a world title in that kind of devastating single punch KO fashion inside 2 rounds. I mean, you could have like Anthony Joshua versus Charles Martin, but it really doesn't feel like the same thing. I mean, I watched the Japanese fighter a little bit in the week running up to this, having not seen him before, and I was feeling that Joe had his hands full, with what looked like a live opponent with decent power, a decent stand-up boxer who wasn't coming to roll over. And even in the first round and what we saw of the initial part of the second round, I thought the guy looked dangerous, and there was this sense of a threat that the Japanese fighter Kenichi Ogawa carried in his gloves. And just as I was thinking that, Joe landed that combination, and it was just, the guy was never getting up. It was just a perfect. It's a highlight reel KO. It's a contender for the knockout of the year. And yeah, I mean, I just like you say, if you're going to win a world title, what a coronation that was for him, and to be standing there afterwards with Joe Calzaghe, that kind of royal seal of approval in Welsh boxing. You've got to be chuffed for Joe Cordina.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there was a plethora of former Welsh fighters at the event last night. Robbie Regan was there, and they were all there. Barry Jones was there. So I mean, it was in Cardiff as well. Joe's a Cardiff boy, so he was always going to have that advantage. But I mean, if you're going to do it on the big stage, and your world title opportunity is your opportunity to make your headlines for yourself, and he couldn't have done any more, I think is fair to say. I was going to ask you just quickly, Ben, before we move on to the Devin Haney fight, I only caught during the Barnett fight a bit earlier on the Cordina card. I just caught the commentator saying something, because we had sort of music on at the same time, so I couldn't really hear the commentary. But he said something about this Barnett had felt that he should have been in the slot that Joe Cordina was in, and that basically
Barrett, you mean Barrett? Yeah,
Barrett. I apologise.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was trying to figure who Barnett was.
Yeah, lad from Manchester, but I think he is.
Yeah. Zelfa Barrett, yeah.
And I couldn't quite hear what they were saying, which obviously didn't help. But I think they were effectively saying that he felt that he should have been in, where Cordina was fighting in the main event. But I wasn't sure of the kind of background there, if they'd had a bit of a set to, or if there was anything to it, or
not
is it
really
just a potential fight?
Yeah, just natural rivalry, within a division, a domestic scene, which is now obviously necessarily the world scene kind of scenario. I mean, Barrett, I don't know whether he was more entitled to that shot than Cordina was, but obviously it's something he'd be looking towards and advance himself. He had a good win. He became European champion, which is a major thing. Obviously the European title is one of those, to me, it's still a sacred entity, because you seldom get an easy European title fight, challenge, defense, whatever. And it really does make you champion of not quite half the world, but a significant bit of the world. And it used to carry such esteem back in what you might call the glory days of the 60s, 70s and 1980s. And these days, because there's such a plethora of belts around and a lot of spurious kind of straps within them, and I say spurious, but they do become important in terms of leveraging, paydays, positions, and getting people to another plateau. It's like a game, it's like a game of Risk or something, and suddenly there's a lot of these baubles, like you would in a video game. That's what you tend to do, is make them more complicated and more interesting as you go, and that's what's kind of happened with boxing. There's more straps and more baubles these days, and people do use them to leverage situations. And the EBU title, unfortunately, doesn't quite carry as much clout as it used to, but to me, it's still a major big deal. And Barrett won that last night. He's obviously a good fighter, and he's going to want to go as far as he possibly can, isn't he? So he's going to stand his corner and say that he should have been fighting Ogawa last night instead. But there's plenty of time for those guys to be on a collision course.
Yeah, and it sounds as if I was just having a quick look on social media and stuff. It seems like that's the direction he certainly wants to go in. But you mentioned the European title, Ben. When I was a kid, and I wasn't like watching every week of boxing and stuff like that. But when there was a big fight or something, and my dad would be watching, maybe the European title was always like a massive deal. Whereas I think, like you say, it's probably well, as you said, it's part of the reason is there's so many titles that every time you add another one, it takes away value of one of the others.
It used to be a thing that you found that most British fighters who became world champions, or at least even got to the level of getting a shot at a bona fide world title, ordinarily they were British and European and perhaps even Commonwealth champions before that. That was like seen as the kind of the route, the correct route to it. And often it wasn't impossible to circumvent, but it was the regular route, and it was seen as that rite of passage. Whereas, and what you also had was you had a whole bunch of fights back in that era, like John Conte versus Chris Finnegan, and Mark Kaler versus Tony Sibson, and the like. That they were triple title fights. Often they were for the British, Commonwealth, and European. So in another era, make no mistake, there is no question that Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn would have been fighting in that scenario, not for a world title, if they'd have been around in that era, because that is the real level it was at. But then because of kind of on the cusp of that era with Ben and Eubank, we gave rise to the domestic world title fight. And I always remember Kevin Kelly, who had that up and down shootout with Nassim Hamed. He said, "You British guys, you just fight each other and call yourselves world champions." So the European title had to be more important because that was as far as you went for a lot of elite domestic fighters, including guys like Colin Jones, another Welsh guy, right? There's no way Colin Jones would not have been a world champion today, alongside Joe Cordina and a guy like Barry Jones, even Barry Jones is already from another era, but Barry Jones is very candid, and he admits that he said to me once when we first met that, in the real world, I'd have been a European champion if I was lucky, he said, and that was him being honest. He said, I know I was a good fighter, he said, but I was never number one in the world, and to me, a world champion should be something special. So, the European title was as far as a lot of really good fighters could go in another age.
Indeed. So on the title of new undisputed champion as Devin Haney defeated George Kambosos. I saw George Kambosos. I think it was him who said it. It was a written quote, so I couldn't be sure. But basically saying that he's got a rematch clause and he felt like he had outpunched his opponent and things like that. I saw the kind of middle of the fight. I missed the very start and I missed the very end. But everything which I saw seemed as if Devin Haney absolutely won every round, or at least he won the majority of the rounds which I watched. So I found that a bit difficult to compute with what I'd watched.
It's a ludicrous perception, that the idea that Kambosos thinks it was close, or the other guy ran, or he had nothing but a jab. I scored it as I went, and I gave the first round even, and then I didn't give Kambosos a round except for the fifth round, I believe. My score came out as 119, 111, which is like 10 rounds to 1 with 1 even, I believe. I couldn't see any more kind of upbeat for Kambosos than that. He had his head jabbed off, and he was out generaled. He was out worked. He was out punched. He never really imposed himself on the fight, which I think people probably expected him to in the second half of the fight after losing early rounds. It just didn't end up that way for him, And I think as for a rematch, all right, if he's got a rematch clause he wants to activate it, I suppose he will do. But I don't see any real point or market for a rematch at this stage.
No, it's a strange one, and I think how do you sell a rematch when it's been so very one-sided?
Yeah,
how do you sell that rematch? But then I suppose you could say that about Joshua and Usyk, but they're still doing it.
You could, but I think there's always that intrigue. Because Joshua's rebounded before. Because I think when he lost to Ruiz, for instance, there was definitely money for a rematch, and there was definitely a kind of logic to a rematch, because you think, that guy, that kind of chubby, relatively late notice challenger who was seen as a good fighter but not an elite heavyweight. The fact that he wrecked him so, and also because Joshua put him down early and it looked like it was going to be another routine night for Anthony Joshua at that point, then things went decidedly pear-shaped in that same round, in the third round. So there was obviously money for a rematch there, just to see whether Ruiz could do it again. And because Joshua pitched a total shutout in the return and brought a totally different look to that fight, a different game plan, he's already proven he has that ability to rebound. And I think even people see the Usyk fight rematch, rightly so, as a much harder proposition. And it's not like you're going to, whereas he got the advantage of Ruiz taking his eye off the ball and kind of, enjoying the newfound money and celebrity status and coming in overweight, even by his standards, and unmotivated and out of shape. You don't tend to think Usyk will do the same thing. You really don't, because he's an IC consummate, professional and a real maestro. Having said that, he has had the Ukrainian situation to deal with recently, hasn't he? Yeah. Which could get under anybody's skin and take somebody's eye off the ball. So I just feel, while I take your point, but I think there is always going to be more intrigue in the Joshua Usyk 2 scenario for the reasons I've detailed than Haney Kambosos 2. I think George should have to rebuild himself and get himself back in the queue. I think people now, they like to see those great fights that we potentially got in the lightweight division with, Devin Haney versus Gervonta Davis, who might be the best lightweight in the world still, even though I don't argue right now that Devin Haney is the man. You've got Lomachenko still, who's still a formidable fighting machine, who's only lost twice in his whole career. You've got Ryan Garcia, the young pretty boy contender, social media king, who can really bang, who is back in the mix. And you've also got the notion, the idea, the possibility, quite strong possibility of Shakur Stevenson stepping up before very long. So, as people have said for a couple of years now, the lightweight division is the hottest in boxing potentially. They just need to make those fights and get on with it. And of all the fights, the most salivating one right now is not Kambosos Haney 2.
No, out of all those names you just named. The other thing I wanted to put to you, Ben, is I had a dispute with someone yesterday via DM on social media. They basically said, and I said I would put the question to you, their opinion was Ryan Garcia is nothing but basically a sporting equivalent of the Paul brothers, and is no longer an elite level boxer. He's more interested in making social media videos. And I was wondering if you'd mind just kind of putting him straight a little bit on the ability that Ryan Garcia has.
Yeah, I mean, he is still, the difference between him and, it's obviously sacrilegious really to try and compare him to,
of course,
to the other guys, because Ryan had, a triple figure amateur career, since he was a kid, since he's about 10 years old. He had about 200 amateur fights, I believe. He's beaten, some fringe world-class guys, world-class guys like Luke Campbell in impressive fashion. He's not the finished article, and he has his, he has his faults and failings, and his vulnerabilities, but he certainly has some major weapons too. I think Ryan Garcia has got that kind of X factor. Perhaps it's a bit unfortunate me using it such a term for the metaphor I'm looking for, because we're talking about modern media and social media and stuff and talent contests. But you know what I mean? The X factor, what it meant in the organic sense, in the wholesome sense before we had that talent show. I think he does have that je ne sais quoi, and that bit of extra special star quality in the ring and out. And so it's not fair to. I mean, I think the trouble with Ryan Garcia is, will he waste his potential? What is the true story behind the hiatus he had in the ring, where he said he had personal problems? Some people have suggested that drugs or drink or both might have been involved, or just being a general victim of the star trip early doors, which he wouldn't be the first guy, wouldn't be the first athlete for that, or for that, celebrity for that to happen to. So I think that is the question with Ryan Garcia, is at what point, how much is that maybe an Achilles heel, that his head is not in the game the way it should be, but he can fight for sure, and there's no comparison between him and the kind of YouTuber boxers phenomenon that we've seen in recent years.
He's still young, isn't he, Ryan Garcia? I think he's still
21, I think 22.
23. Wow.
Okay.
So I mean, like, he's still learning, really, isn't he? Do you know what I mean? Like all the skills and stuff that you've just mentioned that he's got.
Yeah.
But he's still a young man, like 23. Even as an elite athlete, you're still learning as you're going along, aren't you? You're still getting better. So I think if his focus is there, then he's clearly got something about him, which means that he could push on. But it's whether that focus is there, I guess. Where would you like to see that lightweight division go next? Like, if you could sort of pair up the big names in there, who would you be looking to put them against?
You know what? Rather than say Tank versus Haney straight away, perhaps we should at least take advantage of the ideal scenario you're giving me and maybe make a semi-final tournament. So perhaps we could have Davis versus Garcia and Haney versus Lomachenko, and the winners fight each other. Does that sound like fun?
That sounds mouth-watering, which means
Can
it
you
will
imagine
not happen.
if you could actually do that? Because imagine if it was that easy. Because obviously, I say that, and if I suggested that to anybody, people would just look at me like I'm naive and I don't understand the industry and how it works. Because when I first came into professional boxing as a coach years ago, back 2007, I think I got my license, 2008, a few people, like a promoter, Mickey Hellier, apparently, who's a good guy now, I consider kind of a friend in boxing to a degree. But I remember him saying about me, somebody told me that he'd said about me back in 2008, I can see that kid's ambitious, but I can also see that he doesn't really understand how the game works or doesn't understand how the industry works. And it was probably because I was suggesting these matchups, even at a domestic, grassroots level, that were impossible to make because I didn't understand who was beholden to who, And but can you imagine if you did have that kind of thing? Because I think sports like football kind of sort of do work this way, really. I'm not an expert in other sports, I don't think there's any other sport people would have me regularly on a show talking about. But imagine if you could just say, right, we'll have Tank versus Garcia, we'll have Haney Lomachenko, and then the winners fight each other and the losers fight each other on the next bill. It's obviously not anywhere near that simple, and it's never going to be. And to be fair, it never quite was, but it was a little bit more like that back in the day,
It's a shame it's not that simple, though, isn't it? Because in other sports, to be the best, you've got to fight the best or play the best or whoever it may be. Like, and then we've talked about it, without going over the same ground. We've talked about it before that, unfortunately, sometimes in boxing, the very best avoid each other until they're past their peak or whatnot. And actually what the fans and the media and everyone would like to see is exactly the fights you just said and exactly the circumstances, because it would be, and not just a group of exciting fights, but you're also filling up, 3 cards, really? With 2 cards?
I'll give you another example, right? A few years ago, there's a guy in the States called Iceman John Scully. He was a world-class light heavyweight in his own right. And then he became a trainer, and he's worked with top guys. Like he works with Artur Beterbiev, and he, as part of the team. And he was the trainer of Chad Dawson, who fought, Bernard Hopkins and all the rest of it. And he's very passionate about boxing. And some people, his activity on Facebook, some people have said in the past that he's a bit like a US version of me and vice versa. We're kind of boxing brothers, even though we've only met the actual once physically in Las Vegas. But he was talking about the clamour for Mayweather-Pacquiao before it happened, but it was around about that kind of time when it was finally about to happen after having been, talked about and wanted and sort of going claim and counterclaim for 5 years or longer. And he said, why don't we he said, when you look at the money that I think maybe they finally signed the fight and they were talking about it being the richest fight in boxing history, which it was. And when speaking of the huge amount of money it was involved just in the purses for Mayweather and Pacquiao, he said, how about we take that money and we make these fights instead? And I can't remember the exact fights he said at the time because obviously they are outmoded now. But it was basically imagine if you put it today, he said, how about you take Tank versus Haney? We take, Fury versus Usyk. To be honest, you've got to scrub that one because you couldn't make that one as cheaply. But it was all the fights lower down the card that you'd really want to make, maybe, even Inoue versus Donaire, which is happening. He said, you put them all on the same bill, it would still cost less than Mayweather-Pacquiao is going to take to promote. And there's a big chance that Mayweather-Pacquiao is going to be extremely disappointing, which it was, right? Okay, so what he was suggesting is we need to invest in fights more than investing in fighters. That is what we should be marketing fights over the marketing of fighters and brands. And I think that is, and I don't know, Danny would be able to tell me, that is more the MMA blueprint, that they market fights over fighters. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. Dan?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up, yeah.
And we don't in boxing. So that's what I feel is our problem.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. Danny, before we let Ben go, mate, do you want to any questions this week?
I have. A lot of people know, Cuban boxers to be extremely good. They've got lots of coaches, lots of facilities out there. It's one of the most passionate sports that I have. How different would have these decades of being in boxing had they been able to come into pro boxing? Do you think they would have stole the limelight of boxers that we know have been great boxers? Would the historically it be very different?
I think you have every reason to think it might have been, because in the era before the Castro regime, when they could box, you had great Cuban fighters like Kid Gavilan and Kid Chocolate. They were all called Kid. That was the rules. Yeah. You had about guys like Florentino Fernandez and Luis Rodriguez, all great Cuban fighters. Okay, so even heavyweights like Nino Valdez, who did okay for a while. And I think people always wonder how Teofilo Stevenson, the great Cuban who won the 3 gold medals heavyweight in 72, 76 and 1980, and he probably would have won gold in 84 as well, but the Russians and the communist nations didn't go to Los Angeles Olympics in 84 because he might have won 4 gold medals. There was talk of him in 76 fighting Muhammad Ali. There was the famous quote, because he was offered something. People were talking about $1 million or whatever to fight Ali, and he said, "What is $1 million to me compared to the love of 8 million Cubans?" And and he was saying that he was loyal to the Castro regime. He was fighting for Fidel Castro, and there was a little bit of intrigue when at one point he said he would fight Ali over 3 rounds in amateur conditions, essentially in Havana, if Ali was up for it. But Ali wasn't up for it because Ali was a professional fighter. I guess Ali didn't have a lot to gain, really, at that point. Although, so people were interested. George Foreman once said, back in around that time, he said that Teofilo Stevenson would, or maybe a little bit later, but he said Teofilo Stevenson at that point in 76 would have beaten any of us. But having said that, George does talk a lot of rubbish. He's very magnanimous, and if George told me it was raining, I'd look outside. Much like definite respect for him. Who else? The other one is Felix Savon. Felix Savon is the heavyweight from Cuba. He boxed at heavyweight, not super heavyweight, by the way, which so did Stevenson, because the division didn't exist in Stevenson's time, the bigger heavyweight division. It did in Savon's, but he was always in the classic heavyweight poundage. He won 3 Olympics like Stevenson did. He also won 6 world championships, which is staggering. He won a bunch of Pan Am Games and a whole bunch of other tournaments. So he is the most decorated amateur boxer in history. And for him...
Wasn't there talk, Ben, about him fighting Tyson at one point?
I was just about to say, for him, whereas Stevenson was naturally kind of paired with Ali in people's imagination, it was Tyson in Savon's, era. And, I think with people always wondering how those 2 in particular would have done, you look at all the talent that's come out of Cuba, there's no reason why they couldn't, adapt to the professional ranks the same way other amateur stars do. They wouldn't all make it, of course, because not all American or British amateur stars or anywhere else, translate to the pros for various reasons. The only thing I'm aware of with Cubans, right, in the recent past, is that there's been a history of them being brought over, defecting and being brought over to the UK or Ireland, and people have tried to build superstars out of them. And the trouble is, and it happens in America too, they get to the Western world and they just want to party. They just want to, they just want to get with women. They want to womanize. They want to drink, and they think, I don't have to fight anymore because this is just a different vibe. So, Cubans notoriously, recent attempts to turn Cuban standout amateurs into professional boxing stars have sometimes faltered because they haven't had the discipline or the temperament.
That's interesting.
Very interesting indeed. Right then, Ben, me and Danny got to finish off with some UFC now, just from last night. As always, appreciate your time and your knowledge, and I'm sure we'll see you very soon. Is there any? What's the next lot of fights, boxing wise?
Tuesday, you've got In Inoue versus Nonito Donaire rematch in Tokyo again. It's going to be on YouTube for UK fans for free. It's going to be on. I think it's the top. Is it Top Rank's YouTube channel? I think so. It's going to be on YouTube at 10 in the morning on Tuesday. How good is that?
Perfect. Oh, what happened to David Haye? What's going on with him?
Oh, he was in court just the other day, Friday, I believe, for accused of assaulting a man at a gig at the Hammersmith Apollo. But I don't know the strength of it. No. If you brush past somebody's shoulder at a gig and you're famous and you're a heavyweight boxer, you might have problems. You know what I mean? It could be an opportunist, or he might have taken a liberty. I don't know, but that is the situation at the minute. He pleads not guilty to the charge of assaulting a man at the Hammersmith Apollo right now.
Well, I guess we'll keep an eye on that and we'll see what happens. But Ben, as always, a pleasure, mate. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Cheers, Ben.
Thanks, guys.
Good stuff, as always, Ben. With the boxing knowledge, impressive as ever. I do enjoy it. Sometimes I forget that we're doing a podcast and just listening, because his knowledge is so much broader and deeper than what I follow boxing quite closely and stuff, and I watch pretty much every week, but I don't have the same bank of knowledge, and obviously I've never trained or anything in it as well, so I haven't got quite got as much technical knowledge, I don't think, in boxing as I do with MMA, and a lot of that is down to the numerous conversations that I've had with you. And obviously, other people and obviously watching a ridiculous amount of MMA as well. And we got 10 weeks of UFC, mate. So let's wrap this up quick because I need the loo, quite frankly. So we talked about Minefield. We talked about
Manyfield.
Manyfield, sorry. And we talked about Volkov. Lucas Almeida defeated Michael Triziano via TKO punches in the third round.
Yeah, Triziano was Triziano was a little frustrating to watch because when he did work, he worked well, but it was just really, he was waiting just too long. But he did have success mildly against Almeida, knocking Almeida down, but just fluffed up the opportunity really to put him away. Almeida was constantly working really, really well. They will have thrown the first round away because of getting caught. So clearly, Triziano had some power in his hands. He definitely had, the physicality to put the shots in enough to stop Almeida, but it just wasn't presenting himself with the opportunities enough. He's just waiting on the trigger too long. Almeida got to work and then kept on landing this free hit combination where the left hook kept constantly landing on Triziano. Once he discovered that there was an opening there and he could touch on that button each time, I think on the third attempt it knocked Triziano down, and Almeida very, very quickly capitalized to get a victory. So frustrated watching that, but Almeida, that was his first fight in UFC, I believe, but what a great introduction. Looks really, really sharp on his attacks, but if someone like Triziano with that limited work ethic that he seemed to demonstrate could knock Almeida down, Almeida's got to tidy up his approach to get his attacks off, just in case he gets caught like that against someone that's going to have a bigger work rate. He could have been put away by many, many fighters higher ranked. So definitely work to be had there for Almeida, but a great representation of himself for first fight out in UFC.
Indeed. Karine Silva defeated Poliana Butela via a dash choke.
It's kind of
just inside the first round.
Yeah. Silva was actually showing some more composure. If you've seen any of her other fights that she's ever had, she kind of goes at a big old canter and very, very aggressive. She was, I wouldn't say holding back. She was picking her shots a little bit more, being really, really choiceful. But my goodness, when she landed this overhand, caught Batelho, I don't know how to say her name properly, off balance, for which when she landed the overhand, she then kind of shot in as well, put a combination of a strike and a takedown in, landed in top position, done some ground and pound that really got Batelho onto her side, and Silva fed in this really deep, nice head and arm choke It was beautiful. Someone either shouted out from the corner or from the crowd about it. The commentators picked up on it. They didn't think it was in enough to get the submission, but Silva knew different. It's one thing looking from the outside, but it is a very different thing when you're in there, both for succeeding with submissions that appear to be on and then they're not, or appearing not to be on and then they are. That was such situation. We just don't know because we're not in there experiencing it. But Silva obviously had it in and had it in deep enough to get the tap right on the cusp of the end of the round. It's a shame we couldn't see another round because I think that was quite entertaining what I was seeing with the striking, both having successes with the hands and the leg kick. I'd say Silva was perhaps hacking at the leg a little bit more than her opponent. But it was rearing up to be a good technical fight. But look, we can't argue a submission win or a knockout. They're always good to see. And well done to Cordina Silva. I can't wait to see more of her.
Odi Osborne defeated Zakharua Adashov via punch, KO punch, a minute into the first round.
Adashov was showing really fast footwork, darting in, getting to work with some combinations, which he kind of had to do. He's given away height and reach, but the speed of Adashov was really, really impressive. The mistake I feel that he made was this darting in and out. He just wasn't sitting, waiting for the prime opportunity to catch Osborne either off balance or perhaps countering off one of his strikes. He was just coming in to put this work ethic. Clearly fit, Adashov, clearly fit and wanted to try and express that. But sometimes you can't just sprint into guys like this, because there was no sense of prep or timing to enter in. He was just entering in, trying to put this work ethic in. He got caught and he got put out of commission really, really quickly. I do feel like Adashov's got so much potential. I don't know whether it's just that he's not got the right team or perhaps he's very difficult to coach, but it's just going about his talents the wrong way. He's definitely got the talent and capability. It just needs to be more tactical and strategical with his approach. Then he would have something to offer, more problematic for future opponents. But he's got to address that. But that is what it is. But Odi Osborne, great win, and so he moves on.
Indeed. So next week I will have watched the UFC. It's the first time ever, I think, where we've done a show where I haven't been able to watch the UFC the night before, right? Which is so it is a very unusual situation. It was a combination of Wales being in the football today, and also there was just a lot of boxing on yesterday, and I knew that you would definitely watch the UFC. I thought, like, if I make sure that's okay, boxing, and we get it done between us.
Absolutely.
Right, guys and girls, we'll be back next week. We got another top guest. I'm just checking, actually, is it next week? Yes, it is. The 12th. Already got that guest in because I've been lining them up. Big thank you to Mason Jones for finding time for us today, and of course Ben, as always, for joining us. We always enjoy his knowledge. Danny, as always, mate, pleasure to be joined by a legend like yourself.
Likewise, Si, and listeners, always enjoy each week. Can't wait for next week.
See you next week. Be good, be nice, and if you can't be those, shave your head like me and Danny.